to 30 minutes tonight.
Thank you. Thank you guys for having me. It's an honor to be here. It's an honor to get to ask to do anything around here, especially to get to speak to some people. That certainly, I was not in big demand not long ago to speak to anybody or tell anyone anything about my life. So it's an honor to get to do this today. My name's Chad Payne. I'm a drug addict, and I've been clean and sober since April the 2nd of 2003. So we're coming up on 20 years, which is kind of cool. But I kind of feel old too, you know. But anyway, it's a real miracle for me and for all those who have been a part of this journey with me, family and friends and everything. So we're sure grateful to you guys to keep this thing going. So on page 29 in the big book, it says each individual in the personal stories describes in his own language and from his own point of view the way he established his relationship with God. So that's what I want to talk about in these few minutes that I have. It's interesting when this relationship started. You know, I came into this program very agnostic and atheist, and it wasn't an issue that I had with the Christian church or an issue that I had with God or anything in particular. I just thought all spiritual things were nonsense. And whether it was meditation, Eastern, Western, indigenous, whatever kind of spiritual path it was, I just thought it was ridiculous. And that's not the case anymore. I've done all kinds of fun things. I've done Bible studies and I've done meditation classes and Native American sweat lodges and kirtans, chanted Hare Krishna, and all these cool things now that I get to do as a result of practicing the 11th step of this program. But in the beginning, I didn't care anything about it, anything spiritual. But as I'll talk about in a few minutes, I was driven into to trying to get a hold of some spirituality, not because I wanted it, but because I needed it. And it became very clear to me how bad I needed it if I wanted to live and to experience any sort of peace or happiness in my life. So when did this relationship with God start? It didn't start when I walked in here, and it didn't start when I took the 3rd step or when I completed the 12 steps or whatever. This relationship, as I look back, I can see that it really started a long time ago when there were a series of events that happened that drove me to seek a relationship with a God that I didn't even believe in. And that's what I want to talk about. What paved the way to surrender? And then how to continue to live in a state of surrender, because really that's the key. The key to an awakened spirit is surrender. We don't have to go out and do anything as far as developing this relationship with God or God consciousness or awakening the spirit. What we have to do is undo the things that are blocking me from having that. And the way that we undo it is always through this path of surrender. That's what it's always about. And surrender's it's an interesting concept, and it's taken me many years to understand what it means to surrender, but understanding is not necessary. I don't have to really understand it to do it, So what I've got to do is just take some action, and maybe I take some action that I don't understand. So let's kind of start at the beginning. I was doing pretty good as a kid. I come from a loving family, but a very dysfunctional family. There's a lot of 12-step recovery in my family today, which is cool. It's cool to get to share a recovery with family, but getting to that point is not cool. We had a lot of fun in the beginning. My family was a lot of fun. There was a lot of gambling and a lot of partying, and it was just everything. But then, as you guys know, it's how this stuff goes. It starts out fun, and then there's the consequences, and soon the consequences outweigh the fun, and by that point, a lot of times it's too late. But I started to struggle when I was about 11, 12 years old. That's probably when I first needed a drink, and I didn't have one for a few years after that. So I started to really struggle, and I just felt uptight. I felt like I didn't belong. I felt like I wasn't a part of. And none of that stuff was true. I always felt like I wasn't good enough. That wasn't true. It's just what my head told me. And what I didn't know then that I do know now is I was developing a spiritual malady. And that spiritual malady would grow to define my life over a period of time. And it didn't happen all in one day. It happened gradually, day after day. And I didn't know at the time that I was any different than anyone else. But when I look back, I can tell. And what happened for me when I first drank, and then later when I did drugs, is alcohol and drugs became the solution for me. In the beginning, alcohol allowed me to have fun. It allowed me to get out of my head and experience the world and have a good time. At the time, I just thought it's because alcohol was fun. But what I didn't know that I do know today is that life is fun. But I couldn't experience fun in life because I was too caught up in my head. I was too consumed with those things that were blocking me from opening up the spirit and experiencing life the way a human being is supposed to. But alcohol got me out of my head and allowed me to be present and experience this world. And that made it a lot of fun. Fast forward to the end of my using. Now I'm a hardcore drug addict on methamphetamine, and I'm staying up for days at a time. And my life was full of things I was very shameful about because of where addiction had led me. And sometimes I'd run out of drugs and I'd sleep it off. And then I would wake up after a long sleep and just be thinking, oh my God, what have I done? And I would look at my life and that I had this daughter who I hadn't seen in months. And I had these bills that I hadn't paid, and I had legal troubles, and all this stuff was on me. And I would think, okay, I've got to get off the drugs and straighten all this stuff out. Well, then after so long, the pressure would build up, and I'm not talking about that long, a few hours. The pressure would start to build up, and then I would have a thought of, well, let me get high, and then I can handle this stuff a little bit better. And then I would go find some speed. I would get high, and I still didn't feel better. Now my mind's really racing. But if I could stay up for a few days, maybe 3 days, if I could just stay up for 3 days, I would reach a point where I didn't care anymore. And that's the closest thing I knew to peace of mind. If I could get to a place where I didn't care, that was good enough. So in the beginning, alcohol was a solution for me because it allowed me to have fun. In the end, meth was a solution for me because it allowed me to not care. And that's the closest thing I knew to a spiritual awakening. But here's what's interesting. That's not what makes me a drug addict. And if I have any message to share with anyone more than any other, this is it, because this is the touchstone to spiritual growth, is to get a clear understanding of what it is that's wrong with me. And it seems obvious. It seems like anybody that walks in the door of Cocaine Anonymous would clearly know what's wrong with us. Obviously, I'm a drug addict. If you saw the way I did drugs, you would never ask me if I'm a drug addict. We wouldn't even discuss it. But what I found is that let me just put it in my language. What I knew when I got here is that I was a dope head. That's what we called it. I'm a dope head. I was clear on that. I knew I had a problem, but I didn't truly understand what it means to be a drug addict. And that's been the most important piece of information that I've ever received in my life, is what it really means to be a drug addict and what all that implies, because that's what drove me to seek a solution that I had no interest in otherwise. So what is it? What is it that makes me? It's not that alcohol and drugs are my solution. That's a small part of it, but that's not the whole thing. So what is it that makes me a drug addict? And the book tells me on page 30, the big book, it says, we learned we had to fully concede to our innermost selves that we were drug addicts. This is the first step in recovery. The delusion that I am like other people has to be smashed. So I live in this delusion that I don't have what my experience shows me that I do have. And what is it that I have? It's an illness, and it's called addiction. In the book, it's called alcoholism. But for me, it's addiction. So what does that mean? Well, the first part's real simple. All it is, once I put drugs in my system, I lose control. I lose control over how much I do. You know, in the beginning, I would leave work with some people and to go have a couple of beers at the bar. And then next thing you know, it's time to go home. And I think I need to have one more. So I stay a little longer. And then I'm calling home and I'm making up excuses and I'm telling lies. And then after that one more, I need to have one more and just stay a few more minutes. And next thing you know, the bar is closing and I'm still there. And now I'm looking for the party and I'm wasted. That's the way it looked early on. How did it look in the end? In the end, it looked like this. Bro, I got an 8-ball. Let's get high. You know, this was like exciting because in the end, I didn't have very much very often, but I got some. Let's get high. And this was going to be fun. But what I didn't realize is that it wasn't going to take us very long to do all these drugs. And then next thing you know, I'm breaking in grandma's house because she's in the hospital. I'm breaking in her house to steal her furniture so that I can trade it to a drug dealer for more drugs. You know, so that's what happens to me when I put it in my body. I lose control. I think I know what's going to happen next, but it's not. That's not what's going to happen next. I'm going to lose control. All bets are off, and I'm going to do whatever it takes to continue to get high. And that was always my experience. I had this idea that it was going to go one way, but once I got it in my body, it seemed like I changed my mind. And then I'm off to the races. And anything that tries to stop me, I'm going to have to go around it or go through it or go over it or whatever, or push it out of my life. Because the most important thing in that moment is to continue to get high. So that's what happens to me when I use drugs. I lose control. And I don't take the drugs take me. That's the first problem I have. And that's an easy problem to solve. And you'll hear how to solve that problem in meetings all over the world. How do you solve that problem? Well, you just don't pick up. If my problem is a drug problem and I lose control once I put drugs in my body, that's easy to fix. Just don't put drugs in my body. And you hear people talk about that in meetings, or people talk about that in treatment centers or whatever, and they just tell you, just don't pick up the first one and you'll be fine. But you see, that leads into my second problem. And this is the real problem. See, the main problem of this drug addict centers in my mind, not my body. See, my real problem is not powerlessness over the second drink or the third drink or the fourth drink. My real problem is powerlessness over the first one. And let me put it to you this way. There are a lot of people who have an allergy to peanuts. And that's a bad problem, like, because I love peanut butter, you know, and if you have a problem to peanuts, you can't eat peanut butter, you know, because if you do, you have this allergic reaction and you got to go to the hospital and it almost kills you and they got to get the EpiPen and whatever, you know, it closes up your air. It's a big problem. And if you were to see someone after they had a reaction to peanuts who has a peanut allergy, you might say to them, wow, you have a serious peanut problem. But if you were to see this same person after they've gotten out of the hospital and you were to go to their house the next day and walk in and they're hiding behind the counter with a jar of peanut butter, you wouldn't say you have a serious peanut problem. You would say, oh my God, you're crazy. And see, that's what I have. When it comes to drugs, I am crazy. I'm insane. I suffer from insanity when it comes to drugs and alcohol. Because no matter how bad it was last time, and no matter how sincere I am when I say I'm not going to do that again, I do it again. every time. And there's such a misunderstanding of that even in the world, but also in the recovery community. Because here's what happens. We'll go to people after we've relapsed and we've heard all these people, and we'll go to them and we'll say, I'm so sorry, I picked up again. But what people don't understand is I didn't have a choice over whether or not I picked up again, because I'm powerless. Just like an epileptic has seizures, a drug addict picks up again. It's the same thing. I have an illness. So when I go make amends for this relapse, what I should really be making amends for is that I stopped talking to my sponsor. I stopped prayer and meditation. I didn't finish my amends. I wasn't sponsoring anybody. That's where we fall short. It's not in picking up again. That's just a matter of time. See, if I am clear on what it means to be a drug addict, I'm left with no choice but to work this program, because I will pick up again. And I want to read something to you that you guys just read to me. And here's where I get controversial. So if you haven't been paying attention, really pay attention to this part, because this is the fun part. This is when I get controversial. Okay, I took a picture of this while you were reading it. And at my home group, we read this too. But let me just throw this out there. It says in We Can Recover, it says the problem as we see it consists of an obsession of the mind and an allergy of the body. Okay. The obsession is a continued and irresistible thought of cocaine and the next high. The allergy creates an absolute inability to stop using once we begin. So right there, the people who wrote this understand the allergy. They understand that there's an absolute inability to stop once we begin. But guess what? They don't understand the insanity. See, this gives you the impression that you're going to have a continued and irresistible thought of cocaine and the next high. You might not. If you are a drug addict and you're not working a program, you might not get the luxury of a thought before you pick up. It might happen just like that. The book describes it. The big book talks about a mental blank spot. I had a bad wreck. I'd been up for about a week. I was selling drugs on a construction job. I ran out. I was driving home. I fell asleep. I've been up for like a week, man. I needed some sleep, and I ran out of drugs. I fell asleep. I drove off the left side of the road, and I broke a lot of bones in my body. I hit a tree. I wrapped my truck around a tree. I broke a lot of bones. I was in the hospital for a month. Got out of the hospital. I told my family and everyone, this is enough. I'm getting off drugs. I'm never picking up drugs again. I swear. And I meant it. I was on a walker. My jaws were wired shut. My shoulder was broken. I was trying to use a walker with one hand. I mean, I was a mess. And I never wanted to get high again. I was very clear that drugs were the problem. And my dad cried when I told him. And I mean, it was very emotional, very moving. I had a firm resolution to never pick up drugs again. And I meant it. I was not lying. I lasted 2 days. 2 days home from the hospital. I had pain medication at home, but that wasn't enough. 2 days, I was out all night on meth and alcohol and staying out all night again. My wife left and took my kid. Finally, she should have done it a long time ago. She left. I was homeless. And for 2 more years, I tried to quit over and over and over, and I couldn't. But here's what I want to tell you. When I left the house after 2 days of being home from the hospital, I was not thinking constantly about getting high. I just got up and left. Next thing I know, I'm smoking meth off tinfoil with my head in my hands thinking, my God, what did you do? And that's how it looked for me over and over. So here's what the main problem is. What I would say here is the problem as we see it consists of insanity when it comes to the first one. powerlessness over that first one. If I'm not spiritually fit and working a solid 12-step program, I might think about it and pick up, and I might not think about it and pick up. And I might go a year without picking up. But every day I'm rolling the dice. Here's something else you guys read before the meeting. You said, the fact is that most alcoholics, for reasons yet obscure, that means we don't understand it yet, but we know this, have lost the power of choice in drink. There's the problem. I don't have a choice over whether or not I drink. That's my problem. And then down here at the end of what you read, it says we are without defense against the first drink. And then over at the end of that chapter, or the end of the next chapter, on page 43, it sums it all up. It says the alcoholic at certain times has no effective mental defense against the first drink. And that's my problem. I have a mental defense. It's just not effective. You know why it's not effective? Because it doesn't work every time. So here's what I would ask you. If you've decided that you're going to say no to drugs, can you turn it down? Yes, I can. Actually, I can. I've done it before. Some of you are shaking your heads. You're like, no, I can't. Well, okay, maybe you can't ever. But some of us are like, yeah, I can. Yeah. Okay, let me ask you this then. Can you turn it down 10 out of 10 times? Or how about this? Can you turn it down 100 out of 100 times? Or 1,000 out of 1,000? Because if you use drugs the way I use drugs, then you have to be able to turn it down every single time. And I can't do that. Eventually, I'm going to be restless, irritable, and discontented. I'm having a bad day, and I say, the hell with you. I'm getting high. Or I'm going to be having a good day, and I'm going to say, man, I've been clean for like a year now. I'll be okay. Or there's going to be some crazy reason in here, and it's finally enough. Or I'm not even going to think about it, and I'm just going to pick up. And that's the insanity of that first drink. So if that's my problem, then how am I sitting here talking to you guys today with 20 years, almost, I'm giving myself too much credit, with almost 20 years of sobriety? How am I doing that today? Well, it's simple. On the next page, it tells me I'm suffering from an illness which only a spiritual experience will conquer. That's it. For a guy like me, I got one shot. There's the solution, a spiritual awakening, to develop a level of God consciousness or a relationship with God. If you're more religious, that's fine. It's all the same thing. But I'm atheist. I came in and I stayed agnostic and atheist for a few years, and I didn't have that kind of time. So how is it that I was able to do this? Well, here's how. I was so beat up from using drugs that I didn't care anymore. I didn't care if I was atheist. I didn't care if I didn't believe in it. Did I have a step 2 problem? Yes. Did that step 2 problem keep me from doing the rest of the work? No. And here, what I'm here to tell you today is if you have a step 2 problem, great. Welcome to AA. You know, there's a lot of us with a step. But if you have a step 2 problem that keeps you from working the rest of the steps, it's not a step 2 problem. It's a step 1 problem. Because if I am clear on the first step, then I'll do it even if I have a problem with it. I have a problem with a lot of these steps, as a matter of fact, especially step 9. I have a big problem with that one, but I'm willing to do it because I'm clear on step 1. Does that make sense? I'm clear that when it comes to that first one, I am so crazy that it doesn't matter how bad things are, I will pick up again. The threat of prison won't be enough. Losing my kids won't be enough. Losing my job or family or none of that's enough. The embarrassment, none of that's enough for a guy like me. Because when it comes to that first one, all bets are off and I'm insane. Okay, so a spiritual awakening. Well, there's a problem there. I am a guy who lives on self-will. I try to arrange the world outside of me so that I'll feel okay. And that's what I've spent my entire life doing, is working hard to make sure that I arrange everything outside of me so that I'll be okay. That's what the book talks about on pages 60, 61, and 62. And if you're not familiar with what's on those pages, I definitely suggest that you start to study them, because here's why. Because that's the stuff that blocks me from having a spiritual awakening. Without some freedom from my attempts to live on self-will, I will be blocked by fear, by resentment, by old ideas, all these things, and I can't have this spiritual awakening. Even if I say the third step prayer with all my heart, I can't have it because I'm blocked. I have things within me that block the flow of God consciousness. So what do I do about that? See, on page 62, here's how important it is. On page 62, it tells me, above everything, we alcoholics must be rid of this selfishness. Above everything. That means more than anything, I've got to be rid of this selfishness, because this selfishness that they've described on these 3 pages block me from a spiritual awakening. And that's the answer to alcoholism, the answer to drug addiction. So how do I do that? Well, it says God makes that possible. I have to have God's help. Well, you know what God did to make it possible? God inspired Bill Wilson to come up with 12 steps. And in those 12 steps, we begin to tear down my efforts to live on self-will. I start to get free of the resentments and the fears and the self-pity and the playing the victim and the old ideas that are blocking me from God consciousness. That stuff starts to fall away. And when it starts to fall away, even though I don't believe in God, I start to have an experience with God, with a God that I don't believe in. I begin to have an experience. As I write the inventory and read it, as I make the amends, as I sit in prayer and meditation, as I continue to look at where I'm falling short, and more than anything, as I begin to carry this message to the new guy and to work with people, to carry this message into the treatment centers and the jails and the institutions, and to sponsor people and take people through these steps, this self begins to fall away, and I begin to open up and experience that flow of God consciousness. I begin to enter the world of the Spirit. And as that happens, then I recover from alcoholism. And I don't have to try to stay clean. I have to try to work a program. And in the process, I stay clean, and I experience peace of mind and freedom and joy and usefulness. All those things that I always wanted, that I thought I could get from drugs. Today, I experience much, much more on a much deeper level through this path of recovery, just by following a few simple suggestions. So guys, thank you for having me. Thank you for putting up with my preaching. I didn't know I was going to get so preachy today, but thank you for having me. Thank you for listening and letting me be here.